Hi everyone, welcome to our webinar today on Education to Industry, how Gen AI is shaping tomorrow. Before I introduce myself and tell you a little bit about the events today, I just want to first acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I am standing today. I am on the land of the Wurundjeri people, a land where the development and sharing of knowledge has been going on for thousands of years. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. So today we are going to be bringing together the expertise of TEQSA, the National Artificial Intelligence Centre and Jobs and Skills Australia to take a broader look at the Australian artificial intelligence landscape and to really highlight that higher education is just one part of a much bigger puzzle. Before I go on to introduce my fellow speakers, I'd just like to introduce myself. My name is Lenka Ucnik. I'm the Acting Director of the Higher Education Integrity Unit. And joining me today from Jobs and Skills Australia is Hudan Nuch, who will be the first presenter, and also Beth Worrall from the National Artificial Intelligence Centre. The reason we thought of getting the three different sort of points of view together is to really kind of demonstrate not just the impact that Gen AI is having on the higher education sector, which of course is something that we're very, very interested in, but also to kind of look more broadly at the Australian regulatory landscape and also look at the needs of industry. We also recognise that professional and accrediting bodies and higher education providers have a critical role in this transformation as we work together to ensure that the graduates of tomorrow have all of the skills, knowledge and competencies needed when they enter into the workforce. So to begin with, I'd like to pass over to the first speaker today, Hudan Nuch from Jobs and Skills Australia, and then we will continue with the following speakers. Thank you very much. It turns out I'm going to have to improvise for a little bit because Hudan is a little bit late. He did apologise. He was saying he was presenting at something else until 2 o'clock. So I will kind of just think on my feet very briefly. But one of the things that I've actually come to realise in my time when I've been presenting at various workshops and symposiums is that something that I regularly hear from various industry representatives is that one thing that they're really concerned about is that the graduates who are going to be entering the workforce in the coming years will not be adequately prepared. One thing that they've often discussed is that the graduates who they're receiving now, because they were doing their degrees during the time when Gen AI came, they are now entering the workforce and having to be upskilled in certain kind of competencies that they weren't familiar with. And what industries are really concerned about is that they're going to have to continue doing this for another 5 or so years if we are not preparing everyone with the adequate skills. Now, while I'm babbling, I am just going to check with our AV people. No, Hudan is not there still, but Beth is. Beth, would you be okay to speak next, or should I continue on?
I'm totally fine to do my presentation now. That's
Okay,
fine.
fantastic. So Beth Worrall is from the National Artificial Intelligence Centre and she's going to be talking to you about the more broad regulatory landscape. Now, in our ideal world, I have to confess that Beth was hoping to go second because her sort of presentation would fit much more nicely following the jobs and skills presentation, but I'm sure all of us being professionals and everyone saying some very interesting things, this will work equally as well. So without further ado, I'd like to pass you over to my colleague from National Artificial Intelligence Centre, and she will present to you on AI and the regulatory landscape. Thank you, Beth.
Thank you so much. It's lovely to be here today with you. My name is Beth Worrall. I lead the Responsible AI programs for the National AI Centre. We are part of the Department of Industry, Science and Resources. Before I start today, I would like to recognise that I am joining you today from Ghana country down here in South Australia. I would like to pay my respects to all Indigenous people and to elders past, present and emerging. In relation to my session today, I will be touching on some of the work that the National AI Centre is doing to prepare and equip the Australian economy for a regulatory piece of work that is happening through the department. But it's actually not our role to develop or deploy legislation. That's for the government and the minister. So we'll be talking a lot more about what we are doing at the National AI Centre in parallel with some of those more legislative requirements or pieces of work that are being undertaken by other people. So I want to provide you with a quick overview of the National AI Centre. I want to touch on how and what we're using AI for here in Australia. I will be talking fundamentally about the importance of the role of trust in this technology and how it really underpins widespread adoption of AI here in Australia. I'll be sharing some resources that I would love for you to have a look at and think about how, whether you can use them in your work, and then asking for some opportunities to collaborate going forward, as well as providing you with some free resources. But it is very much sharing some of the work that the National AI Centre is doing with a big ask for you as well. So in terms of the National AI Centre, we were established back in 2022, and we were designed to do two key things. So our objective is to drive the adoption of AI in Australia, and we wanted to focus on that piece of work being underpinned by the safe and responsible use of AI here in Australia. But we also do a lot to develop and spotlight Australia's own AI ecosystem. And we have a report coming out very, very soon that will help to spotlight just how many AI businesses we actually have here in Australia. But before we get into some of that work, I thought I would start with a definition of AI, which I think can often be a helpful place to start for us. So when we talk about AI, particularly in the most recent period of time, so the last couple of years, we are talking about generative AI by and large. It is worth reflecting on the fact that AI or machine learning has been around for a really, really long time, decades, and there is a long history of this as a discipline, as a science. But I think with the explosion of generative AI and in particular ChatGPT, it really caught people's imagination in a way that perhaps was a little unexpected. Suddenly we can use and interact with these tools in using simple language. And I think this has really catalyzed a big focus. And certainly we have seen the focus in recent years with the Australian government looking at AI, and there is a broad recognition that we really need to do more and do more faster. If you would have seen a piece just today in The Guardian, we're hearing from the minister that we really have no choice now to embrace AI and to do so in a safe and responsible way, of course. I think it's also worth us reflecting on what makes AI different from other technologies. So I think it's important that we acknowledge that there are some differences in relation to AI that makes it different for us to consider the impacts and potential opportunities and risks associated with this in the Australian economy. So what we are seeing now that AI isn't just a tool. It's capable of moving at a speed that humans simply cannot match. We are moving towards a future of agentic AI, which is going to see us using AI less in relation to fixing and undertaking task-based activity, but almost like an independent agent that is capable of doing work and coming back to us. So whilst it is exciting, it is also worth considering that we really need to be mindful about how we're using this technology. So as I said, we're moving from these task-based activities in the application of AI to help us save time and do more in a faster way to this agentic AI, which I think is going to be the next big leap forward and really capture people's attention and imagination in a similar way to ChatGPT. Is going to be the next opportunity for people to really understand what this technology means. And I think I have heard, sayings and everyone's talking about it, but I think it is worth us thinking about. We are all learning to swim at the same time. AI is going to affect everyone, every job, every piece of our economy and our society, and it's incumbent on us to think about what that might mean for our own jobs, but for industries and how we are also preparing people for the future. So if we think about AI use in Australia, I do want to say, you may have seen in recent times that we want to be moving more to an AI maker, not an AI taker. And I think it's fantastic to see that actually Australia has hundreds, if not thousands, of AI businesses in Australia. We, as I said, are going to be publishing a report in the next couple of weeks that really helps to measure and quantify the amount of AI businesses here in the country. And we can be really proud, I think, of what we are developing here in Australia and how these businesses are going. But of course, there is more to do, and that's something that the National AI Centre is really looking to focus on. Now, there's lots and lots of different reports out there that help to also quantify the economic potential for Australia in the use of AI. This report from the Kingston Group, which is a number of university professors coming together to consolidate and share research and produce reports, I think was really compelling, and that quantified the benefit of AI application across the economy at some 200 billion per annum up until 2030, and the creation of 150,000 jobs. So there is no doubt that AI will also affect and reduce jobs in some instances, just as every technology has had a similar impact in history. And I often reflect on my mother's own experience. When she finished school, she worked as a typist in a typing pool, and these jobs just simply do not exist anymore, but thanks to word processing, and probably thank God from my mum's perspective, because it was very tedious and boring. So what we will see certainly is a change in the economy and an adjustment of jobs, and AI will continue to support us to fast track some of those more tedious activities. As I said earlier, of course, AI will start to act more independently as well, and that's going to have some ramifications for job types as well. I think it's also worth reflecting that there are significant opportunity costs to not implementing AI. And again, in this report, it was quantified at $35.7 billion per year if we do not deploy AI, particularly across industries that really need that digital transformation. Now, as I said, there's lots of these reports out there. The Tech Council produced a report that I thought was really helpful in the way that it specified a slow adoption, medium adoption, and a fast-paced adoption. And certainly you could see the economic benefit in deploying AI faster. But we have to do so at the speed of trust. You may have seen the Business Council produced a report a couple of weeks ago, actually, and they really linked the deployment of AI in the context of Australia's productivity challenges. And I'm sure you're fully across some of the productivity challenges that face us here in Australia. But I thought it was quite telling that they were talking about that this being the single biggest opportunity to address some of our most prominent and enduring challenges. I think this report was really well balanced. The Committee for Economic Development in Australia also do a report that is really well balanced and looking at the implications and opportunities of AI across the whole of the economy and society, as well as some of the environmental considerations. So these are all really valid and important points for us to consider. But I think the writing is on the wall in terms of this being a huge economic opportunity for Australia. But we can only do so at the speed of trust. And there was another report that came out just recently from KPMG and the University of Melbourne. It was quite confronting in that Australia actually ranks as one of the most negative countries in people's perceptions of AI. So it was very sobering to read that Australians believe at this point in time that the risks associated with AI may outweigh the benefits associated with AI. But it's actually also a huge opportunity, this report, because 83% of Australians surveyed in this report said that they would be more willing to trust AI systems if they were governed by or aligned to international AI safety standards, such as the ISO AI Management System Standard, or an Australian-specific responsible AI governance framework. And that's what I will be talking about in just a sec. So I think whilst it is sobering to see that Australians are feeling negative and perhaps even frightened or nervous about the implications of AI, the important point here is that adhering to international and national frameworks is going to make a big difference in how people feel about the use of this technology. Now, Australia, I think, can be really proud of the fact that we've been talking about this for quite some time. And so the consultation really started multiple years ago, but we were one of the first countries in the world to produce and publish the Australian Ethics Principles back in 2019. As I said, the National AI Centre was established in 22, and we produced the Voluntary AI Safety Standard in 24. So there are multiple other commitments that we have made. We participate in a number of international conversations about AI safety, be it in Korea or the UK or France. But we have actually spent a fair bit of time listening, consulting, and developing an approach that is very Australian specific, informed by our unique perspectives and what we know is important here in Australia, in the Australian context. So just starting with the AI ethics principles, we have the 8 principles there on the right-hand side, and it does talk about the process that was undertaken. Now, this happened prior to my joining government. Actually, my background is mostly in industry, and I have been so impressed by the thorough approach to consultation that I have seen that is evidenced by the approach and the materials that have been produced as a result of this consultation process. It has been extremely thorough. A lot of the consultation materials are also published publicly on the Consultation Hub website as well. So that gives people a really good idea of what people are concerned about, where the opportunities are, lots of different perspectives that we are trying to take into account. There was a very similar process that was undertaken to develop the Australian AI Safety Standard, and this was produced in 2024. Now, this builds on the Australian ethics principles, but takes further steps to clarify and specify what is expected in terms of safe and responsible use here in Australia. So it helps to move AI principles into practical action for businesses and organisations of all shapes and sizes. There are a number of other types of international and national standards and frameworks. I mentioned the ISO AI Management System Standard. The US has the NIST framework for risk management, especially. There are also frameworks or legislation like the EU's AI safety standard, but they in here in Australia, we also have state government specific documents that specify how AI should be used within the public sector. So there is a lot of this type of material out there, but the AI safety standard, I think, helps to identify a path forward for future legislation. So we certainly tried to make sure that the voluntary standard was in line with what the mandatory guardrails material was shaping up to be. So this is a good way for organisations and particular businesses and professions to start shaping their AI practices in line with what might be expected in the future. But these standards and the business practices articulated in this document also align to what we have seen internationally and in other documents nationally. So it does try to harmonise a lot of that advice in this document. There are 10 guardrails and some examples of where the guardrails have been deployed, as well as an articulation of how we've developed this standard. I won't unpack all of the 10 guardrails, but they are pretty comprehensive. Under each guardrail, there is a set of instructions and some best practice guidelines. Now, we realise that it is quite a comprehensive document, and it is designed to be a best practice guide as opposed to a mandatory requirement for everyone to deploy all pieces of advice. So it's the best practice guide. And it is important to consider, I think, in relation to deploying and using these business practices, that this isn't just for IT people. AI safety and using AI safely and responsibly is increasingly everyone's responsibility. And so if you unpack the voluntary AI safety standard, you will see that there are implications and requirements for lots of different types of professions and organisations to consider how they bring colleagues together to really bring that experience to the table so that this standard can be deployed across an organisation. Equally, if you are a professional association looking at focusing on communications, for example, or the legal profession, risk and compliance, governance, there are some very specific guidance that will be more relevant to the people within your community. And it's really important for all of us to consider what those implications might be, as well as have a think about what we might have missed in the articulation of these 10 guardrails and some of the business practices that we've sought to capture at this point in time. We are continually evolving this resource. So we have focused on the deployers piece of advice. So for organisations in Australia, most of these organisations are deploying AI systems across their organisations. And so what are the obligations and responsibilities that the Australian public and our civil society expect you do in the safe and responsible use of that technology? The next iteration of this document will be more of a technical focus with some specific technical guidance for people who are developing AI systems. So I think that helps to provide clarity that if you are deploying AI systems and using AI systems within your organisation, then the current published version is the one that you look at. For people who are developing AI systems, there will be some future guidance that provides even greater clarity to the ways in which you do that here in Australia. We also, at the National AI Centre, spend some time in tracking how we actually go in implementing some of these business practices. And you will see here that there is still a huge gap in what organisations even say they are doing or commit to doing and what they are actually doing in practice. So what we have tried to do is specify what Australians expect and what they expect to see in relation to the development and use of this technology in a general sense through the AI safety standard. Then through this research, we're tracking what organisations say they are doing, but then we're trying to understand through deployed business practices what they are actually doing in reality. So there's still that gap in deployment as well. I've seen the 2025 results, and unfortunately, we're still tracking for quite a significant gap in the difference between what organisations say they're doing and what they're doing in reality. So I think, as with anything, what we're measuring gets managed, and hopefully over a period of time we're going to get better at deploying and addressing this gap. But it's incumbent on all of us, not just the IT people, to develop tools and approaches and business practices to help safely and responsibly use this technology. So I want to come to now the ways in which you might think about embedding AI trust in your work as educators, as professional associations, and even as employees or business owners, as the case may be. So as I said, this is everyone's job, and I think it helps to think about AI perhaps in parallel to something that we are more familiar with, which is cybersecurity. So I think when cybersecurity first came out, it was perhaps designated to the responsibility of the IT team. I think over time we all realise that it's everyone's responsibility to keep your password safe, to not click on the phishing email, to be safe and responsible in the use of your own IT equipment. And this is going to be the same for AI as well, but perhaps even more significantly because it will change what we do in a workplace. It may mean that we focus less on the repetitive tasks. We may have more time to focus on other aspects of our job, or we may be able to evolve the job, as the case may be. So it really will be quite a significant change. We also need to drastically accelerate what we are doing here in Australia as it relates to AI upskilling. And unfortunately, at the moment, Australia is amongst some of the lowest countries in the world in terms of undertaking AI training. Unfortunately, also, this research indicates that Australians actually aren't interested in AI upskilling, which is perhaps another challenge to think about how we might address together. And we have to try and change that. I think economically, and as we move from resource-based economy to a knowledge-based economy, we need people to understand that lifelong learning is really where we are all heading, and we all need to continue to invest in our skills and capabilities. So my ask today of you is to reflect on what I've said today in relation to the role that we all play in driving, in using AI, and in doing so in a safe and responsible way. I really think that we should establish and begin these conversations around how we are setting young people and students up for success in their employment or in their chosen field. What are the jobs going to be that young people are going to come out and secure on graduation? And also in relation to the safe and responsible use of technology, what responsibilities do they have in supervising or managing the impact or the safety of AI systems? So that may actually change quite a bit of what students need to be prepared to do. For me, I think we also really, really need to support employed professionals currently in the workplace to upskill, reskill, so that they are equipped and capable of undertaking AI-enabled work in the future. And I was reading PwC's report. There's a World Economic Forum report on the impact and the future of work, and it is clear that AI is increasing as a skill set, knowledge skill set that employers expect. People can also expect to earn more money if they have that skill. And whilst we always say AI is not going to replace jobs, but people will be replaced by people who have AI skills. for those that do not. So it's incumbent on all of us to really think about ourselves, but also if you're working in a professional association, be it bookkeepers, chartered practicing accountants, lawyers, but also subject matter experts like people working in the medical field, for example, resources. AI is going to impact the future of your industry, and how are you preparing your members for that future? We spend a lot of time with organisational leaders and professional associations speaking to them. But if you are also working with the C-suite and company directors, this is a critical, important conversation for you to be having with these leaders, because they are setting the tone for the use of AI from the top. So that consideration is vitally important. And then finally, if you are a business owner or an employee of an organisation, I would also ask you to think and reflect on how you are using AI in your own workplace. What we know is that the vast number of Australians are using AI in their workplace. A lot of organisations still do not have an AI use policy. A lot of people are also using AI in a shadow sense, in that they are using it without their employees' permission, or are using it in ways that they know they shouldn't. So this is, a really important conversation to be having, and not having the conversation is not the right choice. That is definitely risky. I do want to end my presentation with a couple of plugs. So we have a heap of free resources available. We work with the Institute of Applied Technology, which is TAFE New South Wales, to create and make available a number of free courses. We have YouTube content and webinar content that is available. We're always open to talking to you about how else we can work together. So I did want to plug the fact that we also, we have some existing resources that provide a more general AI education, as well as more of a deep dive in the responsible AI educational piece that I've touched on today. We have some key asks in terms of today, and in particular to this resource. We would love to work with you to raise awareness of this resource in Australia. If you can help to plug and promote AI safety as part of your communications with students or members, we would love to be part of that. Anyone working in curricular development or continuing professional development, I would love you to think about how this resource and AI safe and responsible use can be incorporated into professional competencies. And also, as I said, into how you're thinking about the continual evolution of the profession in general. I think there could be an opportunity to work together across the sector to share resources and approaches, just to reduce duplication, because we are all going to need to be doing this. And if that's something that the National AI Centre can do, or with partners, please, I'd love to talk to you about that. And then finally, as I said, this document and resource is going to be continuing to evolve. So if you feel that there are business practices or disciplines that we have missed in this first version, please get in touch with us. It's really important that we continue to invest in this as a resource that will support the use of AI across the economy. Shameless plug for our event in October. This is our main event that we do with the Committee for Economic Development in Brisbane this year. So we would love to see you there if you would like to participate. And I just want to conclude that, we have been working on balancing risks with opportunities for a really, really long time. And the Business Council of Australia have said, that's been happening since humans discovered fire, which is longer than I thought. But I think we are all at a tipping point where we can continue to use and look at AI from a fear mindset, or we can really look at the opportunity and the opportunity that exists to using this technology to solve some of our biggest challenges. And that's where I would like to conclude today. I've got some information there. The slides are going to be available after the presentation, along with some key links, but I would love to hear from you if you would like to continue the conversation, or if there are some questions or comments today. I will be hanging around and look forward to the conversation later. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Beth. That was genuinely very interesting and informative. I have to say, I strangely found the bit of information about the gap between what industry is doing or saying that they're doing and what they're doing kind of weirdly heartening, not because it's a positive, but because kind of realising, oh, okay, actually this transformational piece is not just an issue with higher education. It's a much broader problem, or not problem, but a much broader challenge that we're all struggling with. So in some ways it's kind of, maybe nice isn't the right word, but yeah, that we're all in this together, basically. Also, I have lots of questions, which I will not ask right now, but if anyone else out there watching this webinar feels the same way as me, please ask your questions in the Q&A, and we will have an opportunity to answer them at the end of the session. Do not answer or enter your questions into the chat. I should have said that at the start, but sadly I was a bit flustered. Anyway, I will now pass over to our second speaker. This is Hudan Nuch from Jobs and Skills Australia, who will be giving you the industry perspective on this challenge of Gen AI. Thank you very much. Over to you, Hudan.
Thanks so much. And thank you, Beth, for giving us a great run through of AI in Australia from the discovery of fire onwards. There was a lot that I could just agree with in that presentation, but I'll be very quick and run through some of our thinking at JSA as we're conducting a study that's quite relevant. I'd also like to acknowledge I'm dialing in from Ngunnawal country and acknowledging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's contributions particularly to science and technology throughout the ages. I'll very quickly cover a bit about our study and then a few key themes. Unfortunately, our study is not finished yet. So along with the great papers that Beth referred to, we're hoping to add to that collection, but not until probably August or even September this year. This is the scope of our study. It's found on our website. We're thinking about the whole of labour market impacts, so not focused on just one sector. We are certainly thinking about generative AI being the basis of a transition for Australia in the labour market, and we are really thinking about what the implications are for education and training in the broad. We've taken a mixed methods approach to this study, so very extensive consultation, similar to what Beth had described from our departmental colleagues, many organizations, a few roundtables. JSA has a tripartite mandate, so we're very careful to discuss issues with business, industry, governments, and workers and their representatives. We also have, as many of you would know, responsibilities in training, in the training sector as well. So we're very close to our colleagues in the education and training sector. We are also trying to add some novel analysis to this space. And of course, often there are things that are not able to be observed in data as of yet because we're early in this journey. But we're trying to make the best use of the available data because policy levers have their own lag. We need to move quickly on certain things. It's better to be equipped as best we can. I will run through a few of these in their own way, but just noting that some of these relate to the potential that Gen AI might have, and that includes exposure of tasks and occupations to the technology, which is quite a conceptual thing. Then modeling of how this might pan out economy-wide, also quite conceptual and uses a lot of assumptions. But we're also looking at, up-to-date worker profiles data and job ads data to see what's going on. We have our own survey data as well, and we're looking at how businesses are investing in technology and AI. And there are just a few key themes that I want to touch on today. And hopefully we'll frame the issues a little bit for our discussion, for our Q&A. The impact that generative AI will have on the labor market and on skills depends in part on exposure, which is how easily the technology can be applied to the tasks in the labor market, but then also in practice, adoption of the technology. So to what extent are businesses actually using it? And then there's also this effect that businesses, occupations, workers themselves will adapt to the new technology. So things will change and they'll change again. We then have to figure out what all this might mean in terms of the skill needs of the labor market and how the skill system in the broad can deliver on that. And a main point of our narrative so far is that all of this is quite central to achieving whatever productivity benefits there are of generative AI, and we believe that they are quite significant. And in a sense, getting it right is the way of getting things going more quickly. And I loved Beth's, I'm going to steal your quote, Beth, of we can only move at the speed of trust. There's something of that as well in getting the labor market issues right as a means of going forward. In terms of exposure, there have been quite a few global studies on this. And typically, what they have found is that a small proportion of the workforce faces higher or high potential for automation, and a broader set of workers are more amenable to what they say, what they refer to as augmentation of their occupation. So augmentation is where AI is being used as a tool, so it has changed someone's job, or where only some of their tasks have been automated. So it might be your admin task. So your occupation is somewhat similar, but somewhat changed. And our early indications from our quantitative analysis and also our consultation is that it's likely that there'd be a broad potential for augmentation. Quite a lot of people have some use for AI, and a much narrower potential for automation of a job. And as I mentioned, that doesn't exactly determine, in a deterministic sense, what happens to those occupations. Both automation and augmentation can result in time saved. And there's a question of what happens to that time, right? Does it mean that people devote more time to the important issues or the tasks that are, more interpersonal, the higher value tasks? Do they produce more? Do they spread out their time and do jobs become a bit more diversified? All of that is yet to be seen. And even that kind of suggests that the effect of Gen AI is quite complicated. Does it automate or augment the task? What effect does that have on the occupation? There's a lot of situation-specific issues that will determine the overall effect. In terms of how the technology is adopted, I'll just quickly point out that NAICS work on implementation and monitoring that is just so vital, and particularly around SMEs. We've got a lot of small surveys around the place, often by tech companies and large businesses about adoption. Often the question is only whether a business has adopted. And I think this is where the NAICS survey does well to ask further questions, because what will matter to the labor market and therefore to the skills needs and training needs, is also how, to what extent and what depth AI is adopted and used. And you can imagine eventually many businesses will use something like your ChatGPT or Copilot in a fairly shallow way. They might use it for a task here and there, but not really transform their whole business model to fully harness the potential of that technology. And I think what you see already is businesses at various ends of this spectrum. And it's certainly not the challenge of um, education or higher education alone. It's certainly these challenges are, across industries. Beth also pointed out shadow use as an interesting part of the adoption story, that while employers and organizations are figuring out how to use AI, often workers are figuring that out themselves. And so that really, again, complicates the impacts on the labor market from our perspective. So we'll be digging deeper into that. Adaptation, again, is a one that's more difficult to predict. But we are in our study, and we'll have more to report on this in coming weeks and months, looking into potential patterns in adaptation. But it's worth just pointing out that there'll be some occupations that are not very much changed at all. Sometimes this has to do with the importance of manual sort of work, and that's not just labor work, manual labor, but also where there's like a highly skilled manual sort of task. And sometimes it has to do with seniority of the job. So there are still questions about how AI will affect your entry levels versus your mid-level and senior roles. I might keep moving just to keep us on time, but what we're also hearing and finding in terms of skill needs of the future, and again, this is an area where our analysis is still ongoing. But there are quite distinct separate needs that will be sort of emphasized and bolstered by the use of AI. And only one part of that is your digital and AI literacy. Some foundational level of that is likely to be really important across the board, and that will increase across certain more exposed or more amenable occupations where people will need to know even more about how AI works, what their responsibilities are, and what the risks might be as well. But at the same time, domain expertise in a range, like in very many domains, will still be important for the reason that working with AI will often involve the person, the worker, checking the outputs and taking accountability for decisions. And at this stage, with the degree of trust in the technology, and trust is not just about personal views, but it's also the trustworthiness of the technology, that it is still valuable to have a human in the loop, as they say, and to have a human have the final say on a range of tasks. And so domain expertise will still be critically important in the future. The last two sort of higher order skills at the bottom, sort of interpersonal skills and critical thinking, there's quite a bit of research now to suggest that these do become more important, but also they have a staying power and a lasting value as capabilities for workers when you think about how people will work alongside AI. And again, this critical point that it's very likely that we'll be working with the technology rather than putting our feet up and leaving all of the work to the technology. there are a range of issues in terms of how the skill system and education and training broadly can deliver on these needs. And some of the themes that are arising from our consultations and our research are as follows. One is that there's a great need to make sure that whatever skills are delivered are accessible, partly given the existing digital divide and divide in foundational skills. And then partly due to the way different cohorts of people and workers in the labor market interact with technology. And that can have to do with the way technology itself works, or access to training and that sort of thing. So there should be a real focus on making sure this transition works for all cohorts and all groups. There's certainly a challenge that's been raised by many of our colleagues in education and training about meeting the pace of change. And this is, again, there's a bit of a contrast between knowing that AI is constantly changing and you have to keep up to date, and there's a great importance of industry currency, but also that there are a lot of higher order skills and domain expertise that will have lasting value as well. So we're not throwing out what was important, but in terms of keeping up with how technology is used, that will certainly be of greater importance. There's a challenge then of both progress and consistency, and this is my observation of higher education in particular, that in some ways there's a positive that some institutions are progressing ahead of others, and we can kind of gauge how things go, and we can learn from the experiences, the varied experiences. Just noting that student cohorts will not have a consistent experience through this cohort and potentially for a couple more years, in that where they've chosen to study, and sometimes the subjects that they've chosen to study or the school that they've enrolled in will influence their interaction with Gen AI and their understanding of it. And finally, given the likelihood that this transition to Gen AI is not the last transition around AI that we'll be interested in, there'll be more and more sort of advances in technology. There has to be a greater focus on adaptability as a goal for our students and for workers already in the labor market. And so that speaks to not just the students going through education right now, but as Beth mentioned, lifelong learning and getting those mechanisms to work as best they can. I'm going to leave it there. Again, our study will be done in hopefully by August. So there'll be a much more interesting presentation that I can give at that point. But I'm really interested to hear and join in the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Hudan. That was interesting once again. And I have to say, I really liked seeing the skills parts that you listed, because a lot of those are actually things that we also talk about, but in a very narrow context. So it's nice to see that even though some of the words are slightly different, the themes are quite similar to what we've been discussing. So thank you. Again, if you have questions, we will return and have an opportunity to discuss those at the end. So now it's going to be my turn. I'm going to keep my presentation fairly short, because even though the main theme of today is to show the broader context of Gen AI in the Australian landscape, it's also an opportunity for the sector to hear from other perspectives other than TEQSA's. But anyway, now for my presentation. So very briefly, as is often the way to start, just a quick sort of overview of TEQSA's sort of broader purpose as a regulator, and which is really just to deliver quality assurance that protects the interests of students and the reputation and standing of Australian education. And that is really, part of why we've acted so early and consistently about Gen AI, because we really kind of wanted to make sure that the sector kind of works together to kind of move with this issue at the same time. So like Hudan pointed out, there's not going to be some providers who are, more nuanced and some providers who are less, but that the whole sector lifts itself up together. The way that we usually kind of monitor our providers is obviously through the Higher Education Standards Framework and the ESOS framework. The other main priorities we have is identifying and assessing risks to the sector. Those can be both emerging, changing and systemic. And of course then sharing information, guidance and best practice with the sector to provide support and facilitate uplift. So now over to AI, which is the theme of today. So regulation in AI in Australia, as you've seen, is quite broad, and it's not just about higher education. So the first thing that I think many of us are aware of, but sometimes can be sort of pushed to the side in sort of discussions, is that this is very much in the context of global platforms and a global sector. And there are a lot of vested interests. Although a lot of tech companies talk about how AI is, the saviour of humanity and how this is for the greater good of all, there are definitely other interests at play. So I think it's very important to keep that in mind when we are talking about how students should be using this technology, in what forms, how they should be uploading information, and we'll go into that a little bit more later. The other thing that it's really important, and I think it's become very clear today from the earlier presenters and overlapping themes, is to acknowledge that higher education is just one part of our education system, and that education is only one field grappling with this AI risk. So there are frameworks for K to K-12, there are frameworks and guides for AI regulation. There are also frameworks and policies within industry. So it's really important to know that we are just one piece of a much bigger puzzle. And now, noting that there are some risks that might need to be mitigated, there are also pre-existing legislation that could help us in managing these risks. Now, being from TEQSA, of course, I think we all know the legislation I'm going to refer to, which is, of course, the Higher Education Standards Framework. So this is really the one that we can use to mitigate the risks and embrace the opportunities this technology presents to our own award integrity and assessment integrity. The great thing about the threshold standards is that they are very principles based, so they're quite high level, so they're not prescriptive. So a lot of the risks that we identify with AI can already fit into a lot of the standards that we have in place. The catch is that because they are not prescriptive, because they are principles based, sometimes interpreting how and what way is best is the tricky part. So one of the things that I think that we really need to focus on in the role of assessment assurance and achievement of learning outcomes is obviously the methods of assessment. So we've been talking a lot about this, but the real thing is just to make sure that whatever assessments you have in place, they are actually accurately reflecting the students' level of attainment in their learning outcomes. So traditionally in many forms of assessment, we've had some kind of an object that is submitted at the end, whether that's an essay or a quiz or a project or a presentation, and then whatever mark that student got, that was kind of indicative of this process of learning that has taken place prior to it. However, if now technology can quite accurately and successfully complete a lot of these traditional tasks, how are providers having their own assurances in place that those students have actually done the work that they have done and attained the knowledge that they claim to have attained. So looking at the method of assessment is really critical. Making sure that you're actually assessing the risks that this technology presents to academic integrity and award integrity, and kind of putting preventative actions, or setting up preventative actions to mitigate these risks. So this is another kind of area I think that we've provided some guidance, and I think it's another really important one to kind of reflect on. The next one is that students are only awarded a degree when they've actually demonstrated the achievements of the learning outcomes. So this is obviously linked to the first point. But again, it's that award integrity piece that we often talk about. So providers need to have, however you design your assessments, however you design your learning outcomes and recognitions, that's up to what works for your particular institution. But to have assurances that when the students receive their degree upon graduation, they have actually attained the knowledge and skills needed for that award. And of course, that there are some kind of academic oversights that assure the quality of teaching and learning, and having some kind of oversights that assure academic integrity. So those are the kind of key areas. Of course, there are others that are in place to do with academic integrity and governance mechanisms and all of those sorts of things. But I think because our focus is mainly, or not mainly, but we are really kind of stressing the importance of assessment security and award integrity, I think these particular standards really reflect those concerns. Now, to kind of start connecting a little bit to the overall theme and having graduates who are not only demonstrating the knowledge of their award, but also are now ready to go into the world and partake in various jobs and industry and be ready for that. It's really important for providers to ensure that they have the necessary skills to be effective and ethical users of this technology. Now, this little quadrant here has been slightly adapted from previous times, and this is not my own quadrant. I have, being part of the integrity unit, I have actually used this from Helen Ganneal's previous slides. However, it has been adapted, and I'll tell you why. So one of the things that you need to do is when you are teaching your students about using AI, what you want is, in the end, to have an effective and appropriate user. That can be different for different disciplines, that can be different for different industries. But the point is that students will have the knowledge and skills to be able to use this technology in ways that is appropriate and ethical. Now, what we really don't want is an ineffective and inappropriate user. This is someone who has no idea what they're doing, and they're also using it in completely inappropriate ways, uploading information they shouldn't be, using output that is completely incorrect without kind of vetting it. This is obviously the worst one. And then there's the two middle ones. So originally effective but inappropriate was the same colour as appropriate and ineffective, kind of the middle ground. So one is they can use it, but they don't, use it in appropriate ways. And the other one is that they're kind of using it really appropriately, but they're not very good at it. Now, the reason I've changed effective but inappropriate to just have a little red box on it, rather than a red box, is because I used this in a presentation recently, and someone said, actually, I think effective but inappropriate is equally as dangerous, because what about people who use it to spread misinformation and things like that? So I thought, actually, you're right. So there's two different types. There's effective but inappropriate in the sense that they know it, but they're using it for cheating or, just kind of inappropriate outputs or, putting things in that they shouldn't. But then there are people who are very effective, but they're using it for more sinister ways. So I think there's a bit of a spectrum on how that's used. Now, there we go. One of the things that I think is really important to think about when you are developing the skills needed for future graduates who are going to go out into the world is to think about developing the core competencies. So I kind of started to reflect on this a little bit last week, I think, when I was in a conversation with someone who's helping with some resources. And they mentioned that, yes, AI literacy is really, really important, but there are so many platforms and tools out there that it's not necessarily about knowing how to use a particular tool. It's about having to develop core competencies that allow you to be able to adapt as new tools emerge to kind of transition into different phases. And they use the example of MS-DOS, so at one point you learned MS-DOS, but now it's kind of redundant. And it was quite interesting to see some of the things that Hudan sort of put up in some of his slides about interpersonal skills and critical skills, and the ability to be able to adapt as the technology adapts. And these are all of those core competency skills that I think are really important for providers to keep front and centre as we're kind of, teaching the graduates of tomorrow. And the other thing I think that's really important, and this links a little bit as well to kind of what skills graduates will need, is actually to kind of reflect on some industries that will be impacted more than others about what skills early career graduates will actually need. So, for example, if a lot of the skills now, as Hudan was saying, are going to be more augmented rather than replaced, what does augmentation look like in certain disciplines? So, for example, early career journalists and editors, in the past, they would have sort of gained their skills, developed their kind of capabilities by doing things like copy editing in the first couple of years. And over time, they would develop those skills and move up and get more experience and become, discipline experts or experienced journalists. But if that's no longer available to them, what kind of skills are they going to be developing in those early apprenticeship years? And what skills are they going to need to hit the ground running, because they're not going to be needed to do those particular tasks? So I think when we're thinking about the skills graduates will need and the learning outcomes for their awards, it's also important to kind of have these ideas in mind. Okay, so being mindful of the time, I'm just going to move to my second last slide, sorry. So just to kind of remind everyone, so we've mentioned this a little bit before, and there was a letter from the CEO to the sector a few weeks ago. So AI is still very much one of the key risks that TEQSA is kind of interested in, and is really working together with the sector to make sure that we all collaborate and kind of tackle this kind of new kind of issue and opportunity together. We are also increasingly interested in kind of embedding kind of self-assurance measures into providers' own management of their risks. And we're also going to be sort of over this kind of coming year moving from an educative role that TEQSA has been playing since, late 2022 to a more regulatory approach. And this will predominantly kind of occur through the registration and re-registration process, and also through course accreditation and re-accreditation. However, as I mentioned, this is very much the transition year. So we've still got some great kind of guidance and resources that will be coming out in the second half of this year. But we really will be starting to focus more on how providers will have assurances in place about their award integrity and assessment integrity. And just as a final kind of thought, just to kind of murky the landscape a little bit more, is that not that these recommendations have been kind of accepted, but during the parliamentary review into Gen AI on education, there were two recommendations that were put together. So one was considering updating the threshold standards in relation to Gen AI. I'm not sure what that would look like, to be honest, given the principles-based approach. And then the second one, which, if it is approved, might actually have a bit of an impact, which is that universities and TAFEs embed Gen AI competencies and skills across all courses and degrees. So this will kind of fit into that idea of upskilling the sector and making sure that they develop those core competencies. So I think that's it for me for now. So thank you very much for listening to me, and thank you very much to my presenters. Before we move over to the questions, which I believe there's quite a few that have come in already, I just sort of thought I'd give this opportunity to my presenters to give their final thoughts on Gen AI, regulation, industry. What are the key considerations or opportunities or key takeaways for everyone to consider at the close? Just a quick minute, so maybe we'll start with Beth, since now you've been the first one, then we'll move to Hudan, and then I'll just say my last piece. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So I love that presentation from both of you, and I thought, there's such a lot of food for thought, but also just reading some of the questions that have come in, and it's hard. Certainly in my space, it's hard not to feel overwhelmed by some of this some days, and everything is moving quite quickly. I even feel like it's hard for me to stay on top of all of the different changes just in the responsible AI space. But I think rather than being kind of paralyzed by inaction, we all have to start by starting. And I do see a lot of organizations kind of wanting or kind of aiming for perfection, and it always gets in the way of good. It always gets in the way of kind of starting small and moving quickly and learning as you go. And so I come back to, that kind of practical first step, eating an elephant analogy, that actually some of this does feel quite daunting, but we have to start by starting. So that would be my pearl of wisdom, as it's not particularly wise or a pearl, but that's what I think of when I listen to all of this.
Thanks, Beth. What about you, Hudan?
Thanks, and I wish I had a pearl of wisdom that good. What's stuck in my mind, I think, and it's been something that I've really found interesting from our study so far, is that the importance of adaptability for our workforce, and hence the importance of a range of core skills of domain expertise, of critical thinking, and then also the digital and AI literacy to keep up to pace. That whole mix of skills. Again, it may seem like a daunting thing to think about, but the idea that there are so many things that simply do not go out of fashion when it comes to preparing our students, I find that very reassuring, actually. And in conversations with, other managers in a range of fields who are already welcoming graduates who are very AI literate, it really stands to bear that it's those core skills with lasting value that will also make the difference.
Thank you. Actually, I really like listening to how core skills are still kind of so valued, because I think sometimes we get so focused on the new technology, we actually forget that, kind of like Dorothy in the red shoes, we've actually got the red shoes all along. So for my final takeaway, it actually kind of links a little bit to Beth's kind of point about starting. And I said this for the first time last month, so, perhaps someone out there might have already heard me say it. I think that there's so much good work going on already, and there's so much thinking about how the higher education sector should adapt and embrace AI into its kind of breadth of offerings. But at the same time, that huge sort of transformational work is still kind of in the very kind of early stages, and it can be quite overwhelming, and lots of people use the turning the ship around analogy. So all I kind of want to say, I guess, is regardless of where providers are at the moment in their journey, hopefully they've kind of put some risk mitigations of the kind of really high risk things in place already. But regardless of where they are in that big transformational piece, to kind of use this quote that someone sort of mentioned to me, which was they were talking about planting a lemon tree. It's like, well, the best time to have planted it was 10 years ago, but the second best time is today. And so what I want to say is the best time to have kind of started this big transformation was 2.5 years ago, but the next best time to start it is today. So to kind of echo Beth's words, starting. So thank you very much. And now I will open up for questions. Okay, so this first question, and I'll pass this over to Hudan and Beth first, since it says the panel. I'd be interested to hear the panel's perspective on the energy cost, environmental impact of employing AI more and more as part of BAU processes. Mm-hmm. Is there a path to embracing AI without compromising sustainability goals? Does anyone want to take that one?
I can start, and this question is literally always the question that we get at AI presentations. I'm actually really grateful that it comes up because it is a real concern, and I think you can see some of the environmental impacts from data centers around the world, and think actually we really need to be very careful or mindful about how we're doing this. So I know that it is very top of mind for government, and it is being, it's a big part of the consideration that we need to think through. There's a couple of ways to answer it, in that I know that there's a lot of research and focus on how you might decouple compute with AI power and progress. And there are lots of researchers, including the Australian Institute for Machine Learning here in Adelaide, that is looking at that issue, how we can continue to advance AI without needing endless amounts of compute power. So I think we need to continue to invest in that. We need to continue to invest in data centers and that infrastructure whereby it is done in a sustainable way. And there's lots of examples where data centers have tried to reduce their energy and water consumption. I also think that we need to look at AI as a potential tool to tackling environmental and energy consumption challenges. So, can we use AI to address all of the biodiversity challenges that we have, or assessing data to come up with better energy systems, etc. So I think I don't want to dismiss the problem. It's very critical. There are green shoots, dare I say it, on the horizon, and I think we need to kind of be mindful, but also invest in things to make sure that we're not kind of solving one problem but creating another.
Thanks, Beth. Hudan, do you have anything? I think Beth's covered it pretty thoroughly, but
I think so. I think I'll just add that, I mean, obviously this is a bit beyond JSA's remit, but just to add that this is a real global question. And it has to do with where models are built and trained. There's a energy cost associated just with that, and then the energy cost associated with use. Well, where are the data centers and what's the power source for them? And that's still being worked out. I'm not sure where the world's data centers will be in 5-10 years' time. So we're in that part of the process where there's a lot still to be figured out. But great question.
Thank you. There's another question that's already popped up. All right, we'll move on. So, my assistant is trigger happy. Okay, so the next one is, how can building trust in AI, that the first speaker referred to, so I do believe that's you, Beth, yes, and staying skeptical, being critical of AI's use in higher education, be reconciled? So how can building trust and you got it?
Yeah, so look, I think almost they're one and the same. So we, of course, we need to be cynical, and we need to be mindful of how AI is used in a higher education setting. I recently completed some higher education, and a shout out to anyone on from Deakin University. So it's very fresh in my mind. But I also worked as a tutor for the University of South Australia, again quite recently. I don't think this problem is insurmountable. Tackling AI use in higher education, it is going to require a big shift in how people are assessed. This is just Beth's opinion as opposed to the National AI Centre, but it's not insurmountable. And I think universities and higher education institutes are there to support and invest in the learning capabilities of people and preparing them for their future. And part of that is in interrogating things, being good at critical thinking, and having a healthy skepticism. I think Australians are naturally equipped with that at birth. So I actually think being skeptical is going to help you build systems that are more trustworthy, because you are naturally going to look for the risks, naturally looking for the opportunities and areas that need greater supervision and focus. I actually think that they are complementary skills and qualities to have. So I wouldn't see them as sort of something to be resolved in that way.
Yeah, I agree. I actually have to kind of just as an extension say, personally, I don't think that having trust in something and being critical of something are actually opposites. I think they can be kind of complementary in a way. And, we've had this experience with other, perhaps now there's maybe less trust with media sources with all of the online stuff, but it's a really common thing to have had trust in a particular media outlet, but kind of being critical or skeptical about some of the information that you were presented, particularly during kind of times of crisis. So I think kind of having trust in a form or a technology, and also kind of holding that technology to account and kind of critiquing how it's being used or in what ways or adaptations, I think are actually kind of they work together to improve everything on the whole.
Agreed.
I might add one other angle on trust is that it's not always clear what underlies those figures around distrust. It's pretty broad distrust, and one element actually relates to what we're studying is what are the labour market impacts. I did see one study said 60% of Australians surveyed, and there were a few thousand, expect there to be more automation than augmentation, broadly. They expect the effect on labour to be automation. And that breeds a certain kind of distrust. It's a question about whether we'll be better off or not. And that's different to the skepticism that we're talking about here. And so I think there's just multiple angles that we're collectively working on to make AI use trusted but also trustworthy. Then on skepticism, I'll just add, I was talking to someone who manages quite a big team, and they said they sometimes have to use the phrase that, remember, I mean, this might be a bit rude, but they said, remember, I'm paying you to think, or you're getting paid to think, right? And the workers of the future are not simply typing prompts in. There's more to even using AI than to be a typer of prompts. And I think that will often come naturally to AI users who are, going through education as they use it in research and realize how best to use it. Thanks.
Thank you. Next question, please. If you're going to give advice to anyone in the workforce now, whether as a staff or manager, what's the most important digital skill would you expect them to develop as a priority given the pace of AI and the lag in policy and guidelines?
I would phrase that slightly differently, and so I would say digital skills are really important, and AI literacy is critical, as is general digital literacy. So prior to joining government, I set up the Microsoft traineeship program, which was creating alternative pathways for people into the IT industry. And one thing that always stood out to me is that it was a way we identified top talent by hiring for potential, because a lot of the skills could be acquired, but the attitudes and the social skills were actually a lot more important in the end than some of the more technical skills. So having initiative, being a good communicator, being a good team player, some of those skills are actually more important. Of course, the entire presentation has been on the importance of AI and digital skills, but in isolation, there isn't a single silver bullet that is going to solve this problem. I think maybe you could also say having a natural curiosity and a commitment to lifelong learning is perhaps the most important thing that we all should have, as opposed to just a single silver bullet skill that is going to set you up for success.
Yeah, I have to agree, Beth, and I have to say some of what you said kind of resonated with something I heard last month. So I was at a event thing, and there was this person there who'd actually been working with AI since the 80s, and now they were kind of lecturing and teaching at a particular university, and they were saying, look, most of the time when we talk about AI, what we're talking about is chatbots. And really, it took me, because I've already got these other skills, it took me like 5-10 minutes to figure out how to use a lot of the kind of relevant tools to do the things that I needed to. So what I would really want from my students is actually to kind of spend the first 2 years of their degree actually developing all of those skills you've talked about, and the critical thinking skills and those core competencies that Hudan mentioned. And then in the last year, just let them run free with Gen AI tools, because it won't take them long to figure that out. And of course, people are in different places depending on the industry. So there's also that element of making people feel comfortable with using the technology. Like that's one thing. But then that one particular skill, I don't think there is just one skill. I think there's broader skills that then will allow you to adapt and use different types of technologies that's relevant for you. Of course, for me, it would take me longer than 5 minutes to figure out how to do what this person was saying. It would probably take me a good 3 years. But given that he had those kind of pre-existing skills and knowledges, it was just a matter of transferring those onto that technology.
Absolutely. And, I've started using my own AI tools to coach myself to continue to learn and stay across different papers, to summarize documents and resources in a way that helps me stay on top of it as well. So, that might be helpful as we're moving towards a faster pace of things as well.
I was just... Oh, sorry, go Hudan.
Oh, sorry. Really, I wanted to echo a lot of your both your sentiments, and just to add that I think the concept of just familiarity is underrated, and because there are free versions of the popular tools, even if you're not really sure what you think about AI, or you're not sure how you want to use it in your career, it's worth playing around with. You're not going to break it, and you're not going to do great harm if you keep your use to simple questions. You could ask it about things you already know about, and get a feel for how it works. And I know a lot of people in the audience would be beyond that point already, but I think for those particularly already in the workforce who kind of feel like this isn't for me, I think just a bit of that experimentation, that opportunity isn't always there with new technology. You can't always just pick up a free version and play around with it. But here there's a great opportunity, I think.
Okay, I was just given a sign that we've got 5 minutes, so maybe we'll just take 2 more questions, and then we'll probably slowly close up. So the second last question is, I'd be interested to understand your view on the role senior leaders play in the lack of trust and the lack of adoption. How well do you understand this, and what needs to be done in this space?
If I can jump in. So I've been spending a lot of time, we've just wrapped up 5 events with the Governance Institute, and we've been talking to other organisations like AICD and CEDA, and they have a very senior audience, and certainly I think the role of senior leaders in shaping and adopting and embracing AI is absolutely critical. So they create I think all of these leaders need to develop what I have heard as referenced a minimum viable understanding of AI. So that's from Professor Nick Davis at HTI. And they need to understand what the implications of AI might be on their business, how to avoid becoming the Kodak of the future. They need to kind of really understand what this is going to mean. And they need to set and support the the organizational leaders to determine an AI use policy and to kind of frame it up around governance of that policy as well, and make sure that it's in line with their ethics and standards expected by the organization. I just had the privilege of listening to somebody who was on the CSL board, and that's looking at medical research, and she was talking about undertaking her own personal education on AI, just to familiarize herself with the technology, but then also being really open to how it might be used to help the organization achieve its objective, which was to create health products and services that would improve the health of millions of people. And so, perhaps one of the critical points here is that this isn't technology for its own sake. It's still a tool that needs to be used to solve a problem. It may not always be the right tool to use either. So she really wanted to inform herself as to what the technology was, what it could do, what it might mean for the organization. And it's really in line with some of the governance ethics and the principles that are associated with governing organizations like that. So it's really, really critical. They also kind of need to lead by example as well. So even just using AI to help support board functions and that kind of thing can be something that you start with. But certainly, I think leaders are waking up to that, and it will be perhaps in line with what we have seen in the past with cybersecurity as well. It's not just the IT person and somebody else's problem. It's really important for them to lean into this, because it's actually critical to the existence of the organization, perhaps in some cases.
Yeah. I was just waiting so I didn't jump in accidentally. I'll just be very quick since we're running short on time, but I think senior leaders play an absolutely critical role in the adoption or lack of adoption within an organisation, an institution, whatever you want to focus on. And I think kind of to echo one of Beth's comments, like to make sure that senior leadership are actually adequately informed and aware of this technology and how it can benefit or possibly impact their kind of offerings is really important, because if you aren't familiar with it, you can't make informed decisions and judgments. But anyway, so one more question or? Yeah, okay, we've got time for one more question. Just very quickly. How can we experiment while also passing the courier mail test? It feels like such a high risk in changing landscape where we are learning while flying the plane. Any recommendations? I'll leave this one to the two of you, for I feel like I have no wisdom to offer.
The courier mail test, as in, let's not make a headline that we are not proud of. I think with AI generally, and this applies to some other technologies, for whatever reason, it's often experimented with in fairly high risk situations. So sort of video referencing AI, where were some early uses? Well, why don't we test it in law enforcement where there are very high risks, right? And it was found to do some terrible things. So in some ways, it's choosing how and where to experiment, I think. But there's obviously more than that. But it is one area that always strikes me, that it's often just tested in the wrong place. But Beth, I'm sure you have deeper things to contribute.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely correct. You don't start by thinking of the most risky career mail attracting headline area to focus on. There's a lot of other business case or use cases that you can think of in the application of AI, and you start small. You start perhaps with some internal trials, or you kind of look at the ways in which it can streamline and support some of the more repetitive tasks. The principle here to remember is that you are not alone. Don't do this on your own. Work with colleagues, identify low-risk use cases, work through it together. There's lots of resources out there that are available to organisations going through this process. And the National AI Centre is there as well to provide lots of resources and support. So it is there's a lot you can get going on. It's not going to be the kind of the most dynamic and sexy solution that you can think of, but you start by starting. You start small and build up your internal capability and confidence. And dare I say it, there's lots of opportunity here also for higher education providers in helping the entire economy upskill and reskill. So think about how you can also kind of pivot into that opportunity, because we are all going to need these new skills, and that could be a wonderful economic opportunity for the sector as well.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that is our time. I'd like to once again thank our speakers who were so generous with their time today. Beth Worrall from the National Artificial Intelligence Centre, Hudan Nuch from Jobs and Skills Australia, and of course myself from TEQSA. And thank you everyone who's taken the time to watch this webinar and for joining us. And for those who were not able to make it, not that you can hear this, but it will be recorded and put up on our TEQSA website. Thank you very much.